I am Sutek. I am the Lord and God of Death. It was the wrong anagram. Sutek, last of the Ascians. Hang on, I already did that joke in a previous Universal's review sketch. Back for Tom Baker month. What was it, Pyramids of Mars? Yeah, Pyramids of Mars review. Still, why fix what's not broke? Did you think I was family, Doctor? Did you think that I was Susan Foreman, your granddaughter from season 1 and 2 of the classic series, and also the 5 Doctors and Dimensions in Time, which is canon, by the way. Last episode proves it. And also expanded media. Well, as much as I love Susan Twist, and she'd be an excellent Susan Foreman, she's not Carol Ann Ford, or even Claudia Grant, who played young Susan / Carol in An Adventure in Space and Time, and young Susan in the First Doctor Adventures with David Bradley for Big Finish. I mean, I know Susan can regenerate, theoretically. I mean, I don't know if they ever explicitly say that, but because she's part-time Lord, maybe she's part human. You know, I mean, she could have a human father or whatever. But depending if the Doctor had a daughter or a son, and whoever's or whichever's Susan is the child of, and they go for this whole thing about they could have children and grandchildren out of order, which doesn't make sense, but whatever. But it's only like hinted she could potentially regenerate. We don't actually know that yet. They haven't done that story yet. But whilst it's theoretically possible, we still got Carol Ann Ford. Why not let her have one more time to shine? Then you could probably do the regeneration thing with her, but let her have one more time in the spotlight. Bring the character back and reestablish her, and then you could do the regeneration story after giving her her final go. So I'm not really that disappointed that Susan Twist is not playing Susan Foreman, because Carol Ann Ford's still around, so we could still have her have one last hurrah before she regenerates into somebody else, if we wanted to keep the character going. Or have Claudia Grant play young Susan. At last, now I can kill everyone and everything in existence, including you, Doctor, who I've been waiting far too long to kill. But first, I need to know the name of Ruby's mother. Join the club, mate. Join the fucking club. Yes, the Doctor doesn't swear, but shut up, this is my sketch. I've been waiting ever since the church on Ruby Road to find out. Yeah, well, unfortunately, you'll have to wait until the end of this review to find out the name of Ruby's mother. It is, after all, the legend of Ruby Sunday. Until then, I shall unleash my empire of death and rule over it for all eternity. Roll credits! Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Nick here, and welcome to my review of the Doctor Who Season 1 finale, The Legend of Ruby Sunday and Empire of Death, the 7th and 8th episodes of Season 1 Bad Wolf, or Series 14, or Season 40. Also, to answer my question about whether I'll be doing this review with guests at the end of the last review, sadly, I will only be doing this video alone, as I predicted. There were some interested people, but ultimately it didn't quite work out. And so, to quote the 12th Doctor in Face the Roven, you're stuck with me, Also, remember to wear my lanyard this time for the full review. Good. The Legend of Ruby Sunday and Empire of Death. The plot of this episode sees the Doctor and Ruby go to unit headquarters to investigate the mysterious Susan Triad, who is the woman who keeps popping up throughout the series and throughout time and space since World Blue Yonder, minus the giggle. So they're trying to work out the mystery of her, and it turns out there is a woman called Susan Triad on Earth right then and there who is launching big technology and stuff around the world, and UNIT already investigating her because of the TARDIS anagram and because she's a big, rich tech billionaire releasing tech stuff to everyone on the planet. Not unlike Daniel Barton a few years ago. Meanwhile, the Doctor plans to help find Ruby's mum by using the time window UNIT has mixed with her VHS of the security cameras from Christmas Eve 2004, so they can recreate the night to try and discover the identity of Ruby's mother. However, in the process of doing so, the one who waits, who has been waiting around the TARDIS all this time, and for a very long time, but has most notably been making the TARDIS groan and moan this weird sound since, again, World Blue Yonder, more or less, but more noticeably in the series. So these are the main series arcs, this and Susan Twist as Susan Triad and the Mysterious Woman across the series. So this story is basically seeing the one who waits, more on them later, and come back after waiting so long and revealing themselves to try and find out the identity of Ruby's mother, but also to initiate their evil plan to basically kill all life across the universe. We discover the one who waits is in fact the classic series villain Sutekh from Pyramids of Mars in an awesome cliffhanger at the end of The Legend of Ruby Sunday, although new viewers will probably be a bit more confused. Heck, longer time viewers may not even have been aware of who the character is if they haven't seen or heard about that older story. Good job there was a Tales of the TARDIS a little bit later on in the week to remind them, even if it was a cut-down version. By the way, I've reviewed Pyramids of Mars if you want to go and check that video out. Empire of Death pretty much picks up after that all happens, with Sutekh leading his reign of death, killing everyone and everything in existence besides the Doctor, Ruby, and Mel, who escape in a memory TARDIS, as seen in Tales of the TARDIS. Good thing they reused that prop for that then, because this was filmed first, then Tales of the TARDIS was filmed later on. I don't know if the Pyramids of Mars one was filmed at the same time as this, or if they came back to that later, or if they used deleted scenes and then decided to use those for a Tales of the TARDIS to link the two stories together and give the audience a reminder of the older story midway through. So after getting a few answers from watching clips of Pyramids of Mars and 73 Yards and Church on Ruby Road, they travel to the future in 2046 to use the DNA identity thing that Roger Ap Gilliam from 73 Yards advocated for and set up to find the DNA of Ruby and discover her mother's identity, which Sutekh also wants to know because it's really annoying him as much as it is the audience about Ruby's identity. So that's basically the general plot of those two episodes. So, Legend of Ruby Sunday and Empire of Death. Okay, this is going to be a tricky one because after rewatching these episodes last night at time of recording, today Saturday the 19th of October 2024 at time of recording, so I watched it Friday the 18th, and I also watched it for a second time, both episodes, a second time back in September after a while after the first episode broadcasts. So it's going to be a bit trickier, but I kind of liked the two episodes more on a rewatch, both rewatches, than I did the first video, or rather the second one more so than the first, because the first one I thought was a very good start setup to an episode, a finale that was mostly kind of disappointing. And whilst I liked it a bit more on the second and third viewings, I do have to admit, objectively, there are flaws, but more on those later. Let's start with the better of the two episodes, Legend of Ruby Sunday. So, like with The Giggle, this episode has a lot of Doctor, Companion, and Unit shenanigans, where they're kind of trying to investigate what's going on. There's a lot of build-up before they go to the time window. There's a lot of stuff with Susan, Triad, and Mel, and everyone's just trying to work out what's going on. Also, Rose Noble is back. Yay! Although, why did they dress her up like a Christmas tree? Like, her hair and clothes make her look like an elf or a Christmas tree. I don't quite understand the decisions to make her look like a Christmas tree or a Christmas elf. Especially because it's not Christmas when these episodes air. Also, we are introduced to Harriet Arbinger, more on her later, but she's basically in charge of the archives, or as some people have joked, iPlayer. And Morris Gibbons, who is based and played by Lenny Rush, who was initially going to be one of the voices of the Space Babies and do the motion capture of the faces. But because they liked him so much, they gave him a bigger character for this two-parter, well, more so the first part, and so he was recast for Space Babies by another actor, and then he played this character, although it probably wouldn't have been too unreasonable to have kept him in both roles, but I guess they didn't want to confuse people, unlike with Susan Twist, who is made to play multiple characters deliberately due to the arc. But we stand Morris Gibbons, even if he's a little too young to work for Unit. Same for Rose, I suppose. Maybe it's work experience or apprenticeships. But, you can debate that all you want down in the comments below. I'm also wondering where Shirley Ann Bingham is during all of this. She's going to be in the land between the war and the sea, so I don't know, maybe she was on holiday. Maybe Unit's got 2 scientific advisors. Well, it worked for them during the 70s, so why not? Or maybe Morris is her apprentice or assistant. I don't know. But it worked for them during season 7 of the classic series. Even if you can say, yes, Liz was technically the Doctor's assistant, but they had hired her to be the scientific advisor initially, so maybe they more shared that role, and then Joe was more of the assistant. So if it could work for them in the 1970s or 80s, depending on, the protocols, then it can work for them in the 2020s. Legend of Ruby Sunday is basically most of the setup and bring back the older Unit characters from The Giggle and older episodes in some characters' cases, like Kate and Mel. And also the Lynx gets a nice upgrade as well, really cool. He gets some good lines in there early on too. I like the line, "Hot metal, Doctor." Very good. But yeah, this is a mostly setup episode for the Unit team and Susan Triad. The main focus of this episode is the time corridor and how that starts to release the one who waits. I guess his time has come. I'm not exactly sure why he chooses now, though, of all times, to A, initiate his plans, or even B, find out Ruby's mother's name. Is he just as annoyed as everybody else that they don't know Ruby's mother's identity, that he's like, oh, for fuck's sake, I'm just going to take over the world now. I'm so annoyed at waiting. Yeah, I'm just wondering why he decided to go now. Just like why Division and the Ravagers decided to do their stuff in Flux. Why did they decide to do that then and there instead of earlier or later? Apart from because the plot required it. So in the time corridor, we get some great scenes where they're trying to discover Ruby's mother identity, but something keeps happening that prevents them from actually being able to see who it is. And I've got a theory that I might discuss later on if I remember, which ties in to the revelation, as well as also the arc in general. I'll discuss it more when I get to the revelation, but I've got a theory about why we're not allowed to see who Ruby's mother is, despite, and also what's been going on with her, with the snow and all that, despite the revelation we find out in Empire of Death. But despite that, I think the episode does a really good job at building up the tension and building up the suspense, as well as like putting the audience on edge of like, who is she? Oh, come on, just tell us, even if it's just Jenny from down the road. Just say it's Jenny from down the road. Just stop leading us on a string, Russell. Yeah, like I said, Sutek, the one who waits, is basically in the audience's seats during this series when it comes to that, and he's getting fed up with waiting as well. So he's like, I'm fed up with waiting, I'm going to take over the world, as I've said already. Um, yeah, because the episode then switches gears to Sutek then beginning his reign of death and all that, with the big revelation of his return. I don't know whether he planned to do that after finding out the identity of the mother, or if there was a reason why he's doing it now, or if he's just fed up with waiting, like I said, and now that he can't find out the identity of his mother, again, as I said, he's like, oh, screw this, I'm just going to do my thing now. I'm fed up with waiting, and I've had enough of this mystery, I'm just going to do my thing, whatever. So long as I keep Ruby Sunday alive, then I can do my thing and still try and find out what I need to do later. And this episode also has a bit more of Mrs. Flood being a bit more of a in the know of what's going on. And my theory is that she might be a god, that she's aware of the one who waits, or some sort of higher being. This ties in with my theory that I may mention later regarding Ruby and the mother's identity. This ties in with that theory. Again, I'll more on that later. But it appears that she's being more openly direct with everybody, not just the audience, but also with Cherry Sunday, about how she's more than she appears. And I believe she may be a god or a higher being. Some people are saying she might be the Rani. If she's the Rani, then I'll believe it when they say, oh, she's the Rani, by the way. And I'm like, oh, at fucking last, it's the Rani's back. Thank God. And they actually say it's the Rani this time, and not just leading us on. Again, like, the whole everyone's the Rani, or insert character here until otherwise proven. It's kind of gotten old, so yeah, I mean, if she's the Rani, then awesome. And about fucking time. But until whoever she is revealed, then I'm going to say, yeah, don't get your hopes up just yet. And I'm sticking by my view that she might be a god or higher being. Again, tied in with that theory I'm going to mention later. Also, Susan Triad has been made to be a name to try and evoke memories of the Doctor, having a granddaughter, Susan Foreman, from seasons 1 and 2 of the classic series, and the Five Doctors, and Dimensions in Time, and Expanded Media. See, one of the most famous companions, because she's the Doctor's granddaughter, and one of the first, technically the first in canon, but on screen, I think she was the third, and also in the cast lineups, and the third. Technically, Barbara was the first on screen, but Ian is listed as the first in terms of the listings. RIP based William Russell. Now, of course, it turns out that Susan Triad is not Susan Foreman, and it was all a ploy by Sutek to get the Doctor's attention and emotionally manipulate and damage him. Now, whilst I am disappointed that Susan's not back, I do like how it was handled as a ploy to get to the Doctor. It's like, is it really Susan? No, it's a trap. And I think the way it's sprung is pretty interesting, especially with the Doctor having his emotional breakdown after letting unit soldier Colonel Chidosi supposedly get killed during the time window incident, and Sutek's missed coming back before Sutek's grand reveal. But then after having a bit of an emotional outburst, he's then has to go and speak to Susan Triad, or at least try to speak to her. And while Susan Triad does remember the other people that she is, it's only in bad dreams, but she seems like a normal human person at the moment. Also, when the Doctor has that emotional moment, there's a great bit where Mel basically gives him a pep talk afterwards, and I think that's the moment my mum kind of came round to Mel, because she never really liked Bonnie Langford or Mel as a character, but maybe she's come around a bit more over time. And definitely with Mel in this series and the Giggle, she might be a bit more on board with her. And I heard her be like, "You go, Mel," after that moment. So I think maybe she might be a bit more of a Mel fan now after these 2 episodes and the Giggle than she used to be. Well, it looks like Ross Jarvis has achieved his goal of redeeming Mel Bush in the eyes of the general public in the TV series. Of course, Big Finish did that years ago in audio, but the general public would still perceive Mel as how she was in the TV series back in 86 and 87, so Russell's at least managed to do what Big Finish did years ago in the newer episodes, so the general public are a bit more aware of this character growth and development and just being better than she was in this classic series. Even though, like I said, Big Finish did that years ago, decades even. By the way, happy 25th anniversary, Big Finish Doctor Who Audios. Stuff for Legends was a based 25th anniversary special. So, the end of the episode is really great with the revelation of Sutek's reveal and the tension building up and everything. Who is it? Who is the big bag? It's Sutek! Although, like I said, newer audiences, especially people joining in the series for the 60 specials or this season, or even some ones who have been around for just a few years, so like started the Jodie Whittaker era or start Peter Capaldi, or even going just further back with New Who. And if they hadn't checked out Pyramids of Mars yet, or they weren't aware of that story or Sutek as a villain, they might be a bit lost. And I think that this might have been one villainous surprise, maybe done a bit too early, because he's a bit more, he's not necessarily a lesser known villain. He's a bit, it's more like the fans will know him, especially if they have gone back to check it out, if they started or were born later, or older fans who watched that story initially. So the fans would know him, and he might be a name mentioned in the general public, the wilderness outside. So some people might be aware of him, but he's not like a big shot name like the Daleks or the Sidemen or the Master, or a villain like, say, the Rani, who everybody keeps saying so-and-so, as I mentioned earlier, so-and-so is the Rani until otherwise said. So, like, it's more of it's like the Macra in Gridlock. It's a nice, lesser-known Doctor Who villain that fans will appreciate coming back for a appearance as a twisted villain in a earlier story in Series 3, before we get to the bigger classic series returning villain that the general public should know, and if they didn't by then, they would after that finale, with the Master returning. So, it's something like that. Even Series 5 during the Silurians is starting to do less well-known monsters, but you're still getting ones that the fans would know fairly well and could be mentioned in a couple of articles about, these characters have popped up a few times, they're fairly well-known villains in the classic series. Sutek was a big one-time villain for the TV series and a few times in expanded media, but unlike, say, the Ice Warriors of the Sontarans, he's less of a well-known villain compared to them, or even ones like the Silurians and the Sea Devils. Again, another monster everybody wanted back for a long time. His reveal is awesome, but I do sympathise with new viewers or viewers who have been watching for a while who may not have gone back to that original story or been aware of him as a character, and they may be a bit confused about who he is. I suppose you could argue the same about the Master in Series 3, but I think the Master was as mainstream as he was back then, as he is now, or almost as much as he is now, for audiences to be like, it's the Master! Compared to now where when they do the Sutek reveal, it's Sutek! The fans will be like, but quite a few other people will be like, who? So I do understand that, and maybe Sutek should have been saved for season 2, and maybe they should have brought back a more well-known villain for the end of this season, or a past New Who villain that audiences may recognise. Example, the Weeping Angels or the Jadoon that were brought back to the Whittaker era. That being said, it was still an epic surprise, although I am disappointed that we didn't have him with the mask on, and it was a really big CGI dog for the whole time. I wouldn't mind that for the initial appearance, but once we get to Empire of Death and he's on top of the TARDIS, I feel like it was a missed opportunity to, at the very least, either make him a bit more human height or put the iconic mask on, because he looks very different to how he did in that initial story, and they even showed a clips of it. At least with him without the mask on anyway, they show his dog face, so maybe they could have done something a little bit closer to that, just for a second to like, yes, that's how he used to look like, and then back to how it is. I don't know, it's just a bit of missed opportunity. And yeah, doing a full CGI version of Sutek all the time does also have a few missed opportunities. Even if there's a few good moments, like when he's turning the TARDIS round back down in the time window, which leads us on to Empire of Death. Now, whilst Legend of Ruby Sunday was an awesome setup episode, Empire of Death is well, is both a lot and not much going on at the same time. So Sutek unleashes his reign of death, and we can already tell that the story's going to somehow undo all of this. Somehow, because they kill off the unit team, and we're like, oh yeah, they're definitely going to reverse this one. Once the upstairs unit team, including Kate Stewart, is killed, we know that, yep, they're going to reset this, especially, and even more so after Mrs. Floodcherry and Carla are killed as well. By the way, Carla, it has a bit more to do in Legend of Ruby Sunday than she had in some of the previous stuff, and she's really great. She's really, really cool in this story. Really like Carla in this story. This is why the Doctor gives her a unit pass in that episode, because she's so cool. She is based. Sorry, Will Maddox and Jean-Luc Harry, I'm stealing your word terminology for this review. But once everybody besides the Doctor, Mel, and Ruby die, you know, like, they're going to reset everything. They're going to do a Last of the Time Lords, except on a Flux level scale. But whilst Flux didn't undo everything, you know that they're going to apply the Last of the Time Lords methods to this story. But whilst Last of the Time Lords kind of built up to that, with some sort of way to reverse it, this time round they're kind of stuck for quite a bit of the episode, and they're still trying to work out Ruby's mother's identity half the time. Or have emotional outbursts, specifically with the Doctor. I've let everybody down. I've caused this emotional moments. I can totally see why some people are saying the 15th Doctor is too emotional and maybe has too many scenes of crying and emotional outbursts. Whilst I'm personally fine with this, I can understand in this episode he is even more emotional than usual. The punching the wall outburst in the previous episode was great, but with Empire of Death, it kind of takes the emotional levels to the next level with like several screens of him being emotional. I don't mind this, but I can understand people's issues with it across the series, especially if something like Dot and Bubble, where it's supposed to be a big moment, or the outburst in the TARDIS here, or in the previous episode at Susan Triad's headquarters. They're supposed to be big, or when he loses Rogue, they're supposed to be big moments, but too many of them too often can lead to oversaturation. So hopefully we'll have a bit more fun 15th Doctor in later seasons. Although apparently Stephen Moffat has written him to be dark in some places of Joy to the World, so maybe we'll see him go darker as well. Maybe instead of going overly emotional, he might suppress his emotions a little bit more. We'll have to wait and see. Anyway, so they make a memory TARDIS out of the memory of the TARDIS in the time window, which is the memory TARDIS set from Tales of the TARDIS. So they reused that set for when they did that series. After filming this episode, they then filmed Tales of the TARDIS in the 60th, so they reused that set, maybe move some stuff around to make it relevant to the Doctor Who's story they're showing. And whilst I quite like this, I do think it is a bit strange that they rewatch bits of Pyramids on Mars on the screen. Yes, it's to catch everybody up on Sutek's previous appearances, but it is like they are watching that Tales of the TARDIS of Pyramids on Mars I mentioned earlier. Also, I don't like the fact that the Doctor just says to Ruby, oh, these are people that I travelled with, when she asks who they are, after he already mentions the regeneration thing to her when she's asking about how he doesn't recognise Susan. So when she asks who they are, he should have said, oh, the guy with the curly hair and the long scarf, that was one of my earlier incarnations, you know, with the whole regeneration thing. And the girl is Sarah Jane Smith, who I love. And also that guy over there, he was the brother of the guy Sutek made his servant, so he was only in this adventure. Yeah, I don't really like that he just says, oh, they're just people I travelled with, like Mel. He should have said, oh, that was me, and that's Sarah Jane, she used to travel with me, like Mel. And also that guy was one of the people we met at the time. We also go to this planet where memory is dying and the death rate is crossing across time and space because of the Doctor going to every planet every time. I also don't really like the idea that it's affecting stuff before Pyramids of Mars, because he gets hopped onto the TARDIS to avoid dying when he's trapped into the time-space vortex, and he helps onto the TARDIS to survive, and then everywhere he goes, he makes a Susan Triad for some reason. And with the one on Earth developing into a fully formed person, with her own memories and lives, because the Doctor's been there, well, Mel says 100 times. I would say 1,000,000, personally. You know how many times he's landed on Earth in various times, especially the late 20th and early 21st century? Like, it's got to be hundreds, thousands. Maybe I'm going to go with 1,000,000, because it's, well, definitely over 1,000, because yeah, he's been to Earth so many times across its time, several times in present day, at time of the series being set. So, yeah, no wonder she's supposed to be in her 60s by now. It represents the age of the show. But I don't really like it going back to mentioning stuff prior to Appearance of Mars, unless Sutek was like, I affected your past as well as from the present and future from that time, because they mentioned 1066. Even though they showed a TARDIS arriving in times from the Fourth Doctor's era onwards, they mentioned 1066, and I'm like, that was First Doctor. That's nitpicky, of course, and it could have been expanded media, but if they changed it to 1666, then I wouldn't have a problem, because that was the visitation. I do like, however, they are showing a lot more love to the TV movie with its clips and mentions to it landing in 1999, the TARDIS landing in 1999 San Francisco. So I am glad that the TV movie is getting a lot more recognition in this story, certainly more than it did back in the first Russell era, outside the Eighth Doctor drawing in the Journal of Impossible Things and the archive footage in the next Doctor. And then we get the scene where the Doctor goes to a planet to get some metal that is not made from in the memory TARDIS. It has to be real. And he goes to this planet where the death wave has affected memory, because it's spreading across the universe, as I mentioned, to all the planets the Doctor's been to, and the ones that he hasn't been to. It's coming to that eventually. Again, it's basically flux free. Basically, the flux, that was the first one, and then they had the second wave at the end of the series. So this is basically flux number 3, but nowhere near as interesting, and more sandy. Although the affecting the memory stuff is a neat addition. But he goes to this random planet and has a scene with a woman. And I have to admit, on the first string, I didn't really like this scene. A lot of people were praising it as one of the better parts of the episode. I wasn't really getting into it. It felt a bit awkward and a bit strange. And at the end, it felt pointless. Even though he says, oh yeah, I needed something real, not memory, it felt like it was just kind of thrown in. It's nice, but I don't know. This could easily have been a scene cut. If the episode... Right, if the BBC or Disney was saying this episode has to be 50 minutes or 45 minutes, this and maybe some of the bits towards the end could have been cut down a bit, or some of the stuff inside the memory TARDIS could have been cut down from the 54-minute runtime. 54 minutes, by the way, they think they could have made that 55 if they had a longer previously segment, but that's me personally. But if they wanted to cut it down from 54 down to 50, 49 minutes, then I think that scene probably would have been a good one to cut. As good as it was, and as nice as it was, it did feel like it wasn't really terribly necessary. Only to get that bit of metal into the screen. Not sure why they couldn't use a bit of memory. If they used memory to make a real TARDIS with everything in it, they could easily have used one of the Seventh Doctor's spoons, for example. And then we travel to 2046 for the DNA thing, with Roger Ap Gilliam sorted out, so 73 yards sort of ties in with all of this. Similar to how Devil's Cord had a scene reminiscent of Pyramids of Mars, which was a taste of what to come, and anyone who was in that episode in the Tales of the TARDIS would be like, oh, that's why they did that. But then we go to 2046, so we do kind of tie in these episodes a bit more, certainly more than Series 11's finale did. And when I say that, I mean that series didn't do it at all. Although it could have done, but it didn't. But yeah, they are trying to tie in episodes here, because they also mention the other episodes as well, with Susan's appearances to multiple women and everything, so all of her appearances. I think every episode of the series is mentioned in some way, even Devil's Cord, which has a reference to Maestro. Not so much the 60th specials, only really the giggle with the Toymakers reference and the Wild Blue Yonder having Susan triple twist as a character. Also, I guess that means that the toy maker was scared of Sutek. Fair enough. So we go to the future, they do the DNA thing, but we don't really find out if Ruby found the name because the Doctor realizes that Sutek has now taken over Mel. He's trying to get her as become one of his harbingers alongside Susan, and also Harriet Harbinger, who turns out to be a harbinger. Actually, that's a good twist. I like that. Again, this finale does a really good job at tying in with all of the previous episodes of this season, plus most of the 60th specials, and even then, you could still, those three are still kind of connected with each other anyway, so, and tied in with Devil's Cord. So this finale does a better job of linking in all, or at least most of the previous episodes of the season, much like many of the other series in the last few years have done. Not just Series 11, which I mentioned earlier, but some of the other ones as well. Not necessarily a bad thing. Wild Enough in Time and the Doctor Falls only really threw in some of the last couple of episodes to tie in with that story, and that worked perfectly fine. But, you know, sometimes it's also really nice to tie in these episodes really well, especially since the series is now being targeted at those who are going to binge the series after it's all come out, but also staying as episodic stories besides the finale. So a series arc, or ones where you can put the pieces together, works really well, and it's also more rewarding for viewers watching it weekly as well. It's just a shame it's so short. Like, 8 episodes is still a bit short. I think 10 episodes would have been better. I know some people are saying 13, or 12 even, but if they wanted to still do the binge model, then I think 10 would still be the best one to go for, plus Christmas, of course. So basically the Series 11 and 12 method. And it also means you could have an extra 2-parter in there if you wanted. So back to the plot. So Sutek's trying to take over Mel as well. So the Doctor, he realizes this, so he and Ruby plan a trick on Sutek where he thinks they're going to give him the name, and then Ruby drops the screen and is like, no. Although, with that scene where she's like looking at it, it's not really made clear if she has seen the name and doesn't understand it, or if it's just part of the act. I mean, it could go either way. Like, she's seen the name, it's like, what does it mean? Or she's like pretending. This could be, again, part of the suspense and build up for the audience, but in terms of the narrative story for the characters, was that a trick or part of their trick on Sutek, or had she actually seen the name and then they needed to put their plan into motion once the Doctor revealed Mel was possessed by Sutek? Well, revealed to the audience because he probably already told Ruby, and then we get the climax, or at least for Sutek, because there's a good 10 more minutes afterwards. But then we get the climax. So the Doctor and Ruby have got in possession of a dog lead and a whistle from the memory TARDIS, and they use that to drag Sutek into the time vortex after getting the old TARDIS back. The memory TARDIS is just left in 2046. I guess it just goes off into time and space and does its Tales from the TARDIS series with the other Doctors and companions. I guess it gets bored and it just either beams them up, or in the case of the Doctors, has them bioregenerate and then beams them up to do this. That series was never really clear. It was just nice for them to have reunited scenes and reminisce on older episodes, but it's not really made clear of the logistics of it. And then they all go off to do their own new adventures or meetups or whatever. Let's just say the memory TARDIS feels lonely, so it just gets people up now and again to reminisce on old stories, and it just feeds that TARDIS. It's just like goes on and does this forever, or goes on new adventures with them, whatever. That's something for Tales of the TARDIS Series 2 to potentially think about if they do a second series. Maybe with the new series, Doctors and Companions, if they want to do something for the revival's 20th anniversary that isn't a special, or releasing the series a few weeks earlier in March or April instead of May. Although that would be very nice. Then again, that'd be a longer gap to season 3 then, if that ever gets made. But back to the plot. Back to the bloody plot, you... So, yeah, they put Sutek on a leash, and they just take him into the time vortex, and him ripping the sides core brings back life to the universe, and they basically do that. That's how they resolve all of that. Oh. I mean, I know this was going to be a tricky one to resolve anyway, trickier than the other Russell and other showrunners' climaxes. Like, how do you resolve this? This is probably why Chibnall didn't resolve half of the Flux thing, because it was so big, it wiped out half the universe. Then resolving it would probably have been a hard thing to do, so he chose just to leave it. Fair enough. Actually, considering how this one ends, I'm like, now, well, props to you, Chibnall. If you could have easily have gone a very Deus Ex Machina or very silly and very anticlimactic way of resolving the situation. So instead, you kind of just left it to be something permanent or near permanent at the very least. And whilst he didn't really pick up the pieces later, it did allow Russell to then sort of use that as a basis for the part of the 14th Doctor's emotional character arc in Well Blue Yonder and The Giggle. Here, though, it is basically the reset button from Last of the Time Lords, but even more Deus Ex Machina. I mean, those other finales kind of earned some of that Deus Ex Machina, like the Bad Wolf was a big character build-up story for the Doctor and Rose, and the story was so fucking amazing. It kind of earned it. Last of the Time Lords was so big, it kind of needed that reset button, but it had 3 episodes to develop it. Journey's End again was a bit of a Deus Ex Machina, but it had a lot of things to juggle. But the character development worked with it, and there was consequences for the victory as well, with Donna's mind being white. Yeah, she got it back in the Star Beast, but at the time, a pretty big consequence. Doomsday's ending was a little less Deus Ex Machina. They did set some stuff up earlier, but it may have been easily missed by audiences, but it wasn't too Deus Ex Machina. It still earned its ending, or at least the climax anyway. Same with The End of Time as well. Even The Giggle, I'm just using the RTD examples for now. Even The Giggle with the ball, the game of catch to resolve everything, it was still the most epic game of catch in fiction. So even that finale worked. But this one, the ending here is just the Doctor and Ruby put Sutek on a leash, because haha, he's a dog, and take him through the time vortex, ripping everything to undo his thing. I don't know. At least the visuals look good for the most parts. This story is visually stunning, by the way. It's really good stuff, especially the time window. And also, at the very end, the TARDIS, considering that leash was apparently made from the same stuff as the Mavity gloves, it's quite strong stuff. The TARDIS doors can just snap it. Like when they close, they can just cut it off, leaving Sutek to fall into the vortex, and then to disintegrate. Wait, wasn't that how he was supposed to be defeated back in Pirates of Mars? And he just hopped onto the TARDIS instead of being trapped in the time vortex. So they're basically doing the same thing here, but I guess because he's bringing death to life, or death to death, life back to the universe, he then dies as part of that when he becomes one with the time vortex, as opposed to last time where he just gets trapped and then hops onto the top of the TARDIS. Which, FYI, those Sutek's expanded media stories are now either erased from canon or he just hops off Frodo's adventures. Okay, that's all. This integration is not the final end for Sutek, but oh goodness, as great as the moments with the 15th Doctor saying that he is the embodiment of life, and then is going to kill Sutek, so that's how Sutek wins. Anyway, as great as those moments are, this is a really, really bad climax, on a script, on a story level. Visually, it's awesome. Performance-wise, from the actors, it's great. Gabriel Wolf is fantastic back as Sutek. He sounds older, but he's still got it. Same with like when he was the Beast. So, and probably the Big Finish stuff as well. So he's awesome with the voice. But yeah, it's just a shame. It was just it's such a bad climax. And then the last 10 minutes, a bit like how the last 10 minutes of Doomsday and the last 20 or 25 or so minutes of The End of Time Part 2 were dedicated to the character wrap-ups, like the emotional characters with Rose's exit, the 10th Doctor's farewell tour, even the giggles last 5 to 10 minutes with the 14th and 15th Doctors resolving everything and talking with themselves and Donna, and then splitting the TARDIS and then duplicating the TARDIS and going on their separate ways, etc. But this time we got 10 minutes, or well, maybe 9, to resolve Ruby's mother's identity and just the revelation here. Now, when I saw this one, I was like, okay, this is a fine revelation. I can understand why people didn't like it, though. But I'm going to say, okay, this one works. And it's because of that other theory I mentioned. I'm going to get to that in a sec. But the revelation is that Ruby's mother is just a normal woman. Back when she was a teenager, living in a bad household, she left her child on the steps of Ruby Road, the church on Ruby Road, to be safe. Although the bit where she points to the sign where it says Ruby Road to name her child is a bit odd. Maybe she was singing it to the Doctor. I didn't see anybody who, when they mentioned that. I'm saying it here though. My take is she's pointing to the sign so the Doctor can see it. I do, however, understand that if the Doctor wasn't there, her just naming her child by pointing at the sign does come off as a bit strange. But I guess she does know the Doctor is there, so that she can point to the sign, and so that she presumes someone will name her child Ruby if they see her doing that, and she thinks that the Doctor would do it. Naturally, that's not the case, and that's why everybody's been kind of wondering what the fuck she's been pointing at all this time. But it turns out it was a sign on the lamp for the street name. So yeah, Ruby is Ruby. We kind of established that. And then she goes and meets Louise, her mother, and they reunite, and it's actually quite sweet when they do. They reunite, and Louise meets Ruby's adoptive family, and then Ruby discovers that they found her dad, who didn't know her, that she existed, because he was never told. Makes sense. But the big question is, if Ruby's parents were normal, everyday teenagers back in the day, and 30-odd something adults now, why couldn't Davina McCall or initially Unit's ID and DNA tests and everything? They couldn't find them even before the time window, before Sutekh, before the climax of this story. How on earth could they not have found them sooner? What's been going on? These people are ordinary human beings, but then anything to do with trying to find them is either really difficult or something's blocking them, such as the Doctor having multiple memories, so not to go back to Ruby Road, or the snow happening when Ruby's either trying to find out what's going on. Like, say, back in Boom, when she's like, who's my next of kin, when the ambulance is trying to find it, and it snows, and it's like, wait, what's going on here? And also the hidden song in Devil's Court. What's going on? Why? Here's my theory, and I don't think many people have kind of touched upon this, at least not from what I've seen. Maybe some have, I just haven't seen them yet. Here's my theory. Mrs. Flood is clearly, as I mentioned earlier, a higher being. Maybe a god, maybe some other powerful person, maybe the Rani, or another Time Lord, maybe Susan, the real Susan, or Romana. She dresses like Romana 1 at the end of this episode for a fourth wall break, the final scene at the end. Somehow, some reason, she's the one looking after Ruby from a distance. She's overseeing her. She's like keeping a watch. At least once Ruby moves down to London with Carla to look after Cherry. And there certainly seems to be something going on with the snow, and it's possible Mrs. Flood has something to do with that. And her name is Flood, which is like water. Snow is cold water. There could be something to do with that later down the line. Also, snow is basically the opposite of sand, so a rival to Sutekh, maybe? Or I think she's another god of some sort, or definitely a higher being. If not a Time Lord, definitely a higher being. I think she's been secretly keeping Ruby safe all this time for some sort of other purpose, including, like, she's tried to hide her mother's identity to keep it a mystery for a bit longer, so because she's aware Sutek doesn't know, and he's frustrated on not knowing, so she does not let Ruby or the Doctor or anybody else know the secret until after Sutek is defeated, so that he doesn't know, and his answer can't be given, so that when he makes his move, he's still trying to also find out that identity, thus keeping Ruby alive. And she wants Ruby alive for some reason. Although she's happy for the Doctor to die, as she says at the end, his story ends in absolute terror. Season 2, spoilers perhaps. We will see how it goes. I think she is back next season, and there's definitely going to be at least one other god next series, with a report of a Harbinger name appearing on the side of a American cinema in the 50s or 60s or wherever, whenever. But yeah, my theory is Mrs. Flood has been keeping Ruby all this time. She's the one who put the Christmas carols in her as a hidden song to protect her. She's the one who gives Ruby the ability to make it snow during moments like that, or remembering whatever it is. She's planning something for Ruby, and she has to protect her, and would also, in order to make sure Sutek keeps her alive, and she makes sure that he is in the position of the audience wondering who is Ruby's mother, and make it a huge mystery. As the Doctor says, Louise was important because they thought she was important, because she was some big being. But because it doesn't really tie in with like the whole snow thing or the song thing keeping Ruby alive in some of the other episodes, my theory is that Mrs. Flood is deliberately keeping Ruby alive, and she made all of that happen so that Ruby wouldn't find out her mother's identity yet, so that Sutek couldn't find out her mother's identity, so they could defeat him. As pretty daft as his defeat was. But that's how I theorize it. It's not really explained yet. I mean, that might be something season 2 explains, why that all happens. I'm sure season 2 will have an explanation, or at least I hope so. If not season 2, maybe season 3. But yeah, I'm hoping they'll have an explanation. But that's my theory now. Mrs. Flood wants Ruby alive, so she doesn't let Ruby know her mother's identity until Sutek keeps Ruby alive so that he can find out, because he's annoyed that he can't find out, much like everybody else. So once Sutek's defeated, then she can find out her mother's identity and have a happy ending. And her father's identity, and meet him off screen. Again, have a happy ending. So yeah, that's my theory. Whether season 2 or a later season will confirm that, or another reason, is to be seen. But that's my take. And I think people should probably acknowledge that a little bit more before they outright say the revelation is bad, because of the whole the other mystery elements, like the snow and the song. Yeah, the disappointment is, it's a bit of a disappointment after so much build up for some people. I can understand that, but when you're mentioning those elements, the snow and the song, don't forget Mrs. Flood seems to be keeping an eye on Ruby. So yeah, so take that into an account. And hence my theory. So the episode ends with Ruby leaving the TARDIS to be with her family, and the Doctor going off to more adventures. Ruby will be returning in at least 3 episodes next series, I believe. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see where her character goes in those stories, alongside the Doctor and Belinda's stories next season, and also what's going on with Mrs. Flood and the other gods. We shall have to wait and see, but first we've got Joy to the World to look forward to. Until then, time to wrap up this very long review. I do apologise. So, Legend of Ruby Sunday and Empire of Death starts off really great with a great, powerful build-up episode before Empire of Death kind of drops the ball in places. Whilst there's some good elements in there, like the memory TARDIS, and I don't mind the revelation of the mother, providing we take the Mrs. Flood keeping an eye on Ruby facts into account, and I've got that theory for possibly something that could be revealed next season. But while Sutek has a great reveal at the end of Legend, he doesn't really do an awful lot in Empire, and the way he's defeated is fucking laughable. Empire of Death kind of meanders a little bit when it comes to both its main plot and the series arc, and it just feels like it is kind of meandering a bit, and it also goes too big for its own boots. Some of the other Russell finales did that as well, but at least some of those earned the Deus Ex Machina or reset button or whatever. They resolved them, or they didn't go so overboard that they couldn't resolve it. And I'll apply this to the Moffat and Chibnall ones as well, like Pandora Copen's Big Bang. That one was so big, that was like all of time was wiped and they had to reset the universe. But that one had, again, a whole episode building up to it with the Big Bang. That one was the point of that one was to basically reset the universe after it had been wiped from existence. So they had to build up for it with a very character-based driven story. And similarly with Flux the Vanquishers, as I mentioned, Chibnall chose to leave half the universe destroyed because it probably would have been too much of a outlandish Deus Ex Machina reset button, etc., if they just reset the universe or fixed it or whatever after the first or second fluxes. Something that could have been fixed here, by the way, with life being returned to the universe. Same with Gallifrey being destroyed, but being Russell, he probably doesn't want to undo the latter of one of those two, at least not yet. The former, maybe, but the latter, probably not. Stephen Moffat would have, but maybe even Chibnall himself at a later point, possibly. But Russell, definitely not. I say maybe Chibnall, that's also pretty unlikely, but more likely than RTD's. And like I said, the revelations of Ruby's mother could be a major disappointment to everybody. Like I said, do keep the Mrs. Flood, keep an eye on her as a factor for the more supernatural elements, the more alien stuff that ties in with all of it. But when it comes to the normal everyday life compared to making her special because they thought she was special, then yeah, I can understand people being a bit disappointed with that. Personally, I'm kind of fine with that because, yeah, they made her special because we thought she was. And if Mrs. Flood really is looking out for Ruby, that could explain the other stuff. So, yeah, I'm kind of fine with that. But overall, Empire of Death, I'm sorry, I think this is the weakest episode of the series. Putting these two together, I'm not sure if I would take it above Space Babies, which is the next weakest individually. It's kind of on, I think it's between them. No, actually, I think I'm going to have to go with a 6 out of 10 for this one. Whilst Legend is a really great setup, Empire kind of lets it down for the most part in terms of its main story. Even though I'm kind of okay with the revelations of the mother, I do believe that the main plot with Sutek was a bit of a letdown and a bit of a meandering mess with a pretty weak and Deus Ex Machina plot. It's not even Seventh Doctor really creative, clever way of planning a way to defeat his villains, like some other stories have done, as a way to, like, oh, the Doctor had a secret plan to stop the villains all this time, or came up with a clever plan during it. No, it just feels like, oh, he just somehow got these 2 items from the memory TARDIS, and he found out Mel, or realised Mel was now being taken over by Sutek, so he and Ruby do this quick, put together plan that then tricks Sutek. And yeah, and then we get that climax. But at least it visually looks good. Good directing on, I believe it's Jamie Donahue, same director as Destination Skaro, on his part. I think they did Destination Skaro before this, though, because that was April and this was about May time of 2023. So yeah, it was probably either between the Devil's Called Rogue block, or during that block, or just before they started on this one. But yeah, good visually and good acting. It's just the story doesn't quite work. The first episode, fine. Second episode, not so much. So yeah, that's why I'm giving it the combined score of 6 out of 10. I would have probably given Legend an 8 on its own, but Empire 6, maybe even 5 on its own. And yeah, I think because that is a bit of a letdown ending, I think I'm going to pass it at 6 overall, or very low 7 at the most. But I think I'm going to stand by the 6. Oh my god, that means Space Babies is better than this story. How on earth is Space Babies better than this story? Well, like I said, the climax, and actually most of the rest of Empire of Death, really, just kind of drag this story down and drags its better first part in association, unfortunately. So I'm sorry to say that for those who don't like this finale, I understand why. And yeah, this is the weakest episode of the series. Individually, if we're talking stories, yes, but Legend of Ruby Sunday on its own would probably be a bit further up. Like, I don't know if I would take over Dot and Bubble, but I think I would put over Boom personally. Objectively, it would go under, but personally, subjective, I would take over. Individually, it'd still be above Space Babies, though. Unfortunately, as a part of a story, this story is probably the weakest of Season 1 Bad Wolf, and the weakest of the Bad Wolf RTD2 and 15th Doctor's eras so far. I would say it's better than the finales for Series 6, 8, 9, 11, and 12, Series 9 and 12 being the weakest two, and not just because of the continuity changes, they're just Hellbent's shit anyway, and Essential to Cybermen and Timeless Children have too many plots going on at once, and none of them are done satisfactorily, so it all becomes a mess, especially in the second part. And yeah, I'm not huge on The Wedding of River Song either. I think Dark Water, Death in Heaven isn't that great either. Again, second part of that one ruins it. Dark Water's not as good as Legend of Ruby Sunday, but at least it has a decent setup. And then Battleground Square of Colossus, as I've already mentioned, is a weaker finale as well. It could have been better if it wasn't the first draft one, but as it stands, yeah. However, I do think every other finale since 2005, since 1988 even, has been better. Every series from 1 to 5, plus 7 and 10, and even Series 13, in my opinion, have better finales than this. So if I was ranking the New Who Revival and Bad Wolf finales, I would probably put this 9th out of 14. The first 5, 7, 10, and 13, in my opinion, are better. And then 6 would be next, that'd be like 10th. And then 8, 9, 11, and 12 would be lower. So, yeah. Oh dear. Series 15, Season 2, Bad Wolf. Season 41 overall. Be better. You have to be better. You need to redeem yourself. And Season 2 probably should look to redeeming itself for the issues that Season 1 had, but it's mostly this finale, and rather how the finale wraps up its story. Not so much the arc, but mostly its story. And yeah, I totally see why people don't like it. It is, yeah, it's a bit of a disappointment. And after rewatching this series again, I actually really liked it. I thought it was quite good. Very good, in fact. I got quite a few positive opinions on it. Even Space Babies. Even Empire of Death, to a lesser extent. But unfortunately, the objectiveness of Empire of Death does kind of let it down. And I suppose Space Babies as well. So, I guess those kind of attack the reputation of the season. And yeah, it kind of comes to a bit of an unsatisfactory conclusion. Well, at least we got Stephen Moffat's second and apparently last script for this era to save the series. Yeah, Boom's not the one that saves the show. It's going to be Joy to the World. Hopefully. Well, I guess we'll have to find out next time when we arrive at Christmas Day 2024 with Joy to the World. And then next year, Season 2, Series 15, Season 41, etc, etc. So until then, thank you for watching our reviews on the Whoniversals, ladies and gentlemen, and I shall see you guys next time. Goodbye.